Amanda, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, most of you who already are in my network know who I am. I am the CEO and founder of Irish Angel Incorporated, which is a non-profit for law enforcement, first responders and the military who suffer with PTSD and any mentally health related illnesses or addictions. So we want to be able to send those in need whose insurance don't cover things, basically, to go and get the help they need. So we're very much focused on their mental well-being and their lifestyle, and not just when they're in the force, but when they leave the force.
It became apparent when Amanda and I had conversations that we both recognized a need in the law enforcement world that we recognized from different viewpoints or different angles. And we wanted to have, we thought we needed to have a conversation, get it out there, and see what other people thought about it too, because we feel like this needs some focused attention, and there's a need for doing something a little bit better. So Amanda, why don't you talk a little bit about what we're talking about today?
Yeah. So we're basically talking about, as you and I had a conversation previously about law enforcement who is in retirement. There is an awful lot of deaths through suicide when somebody retires and they don't go documented. And that concerns me because we always focus on those in service right now, which is, it's our cause, it's what we're about. However, we cannot forget those who have left the force. And you know, it's a very daunting time for them. And when I obviously heard you I actually heard you first on a podcast, and I loved the fact that yes, you are a for-profit business. However, you're a for-profit with a heart. You understand the people, you understand what their needs was, and I think that's what attracted me to you. So when we got to talking about what you do, it then rolled into the conversation of how can we help, you know, those in need who are going to be leaving law enforcement, because it is such a daunting task. And from talking to many officers who have retired or who are about to retire, it's quite frightening for some, you know, and they don't really want to talk about it as such to their colleagues or whatever. To them, you know, it's, oh great, I'm going to retire, I'm going to go fishing, I'm going to do, you know, all the things you're meant to do when you retire. But for them, once that period of time is over, it then lulls into the situation where they then have too much time to think, and it then runs into depression, and then sometimes alcoholism, sometimes prescription meds, or you know, it just out and out depression. So they think, from talking to a lot of law enforcement people who have retired, a lot of them, the consensus across the field is that they feel that they have no purpose anymore. That once they leave the force, as much as you're once blue, always blue, you then are not having a purpose to get up in the morning, put on your uniform, go to work, go out to the public and have a place in your community. You're just another person. And that's such a difficult thing for them, you know, and they feel a sense of hopelessness, and they say, you know, I know nothing but law enforcement, so I don't have any skills. And for me, that's not right. You learn so much when you become a police officer. You know, there's like, you have admin, you have problem solving, you have security, you have all different training aspects that you've been taught along the years that you can pass on to knowledge to everybody else. So there is a whole field of, you know, what you can do when you leave help, but it's finding, you know, I think we have to learn to teach people to prepare for retirement, because again, you always think, yes, I'm going to retire, but when it actually happens, it's completely different. Like I said, there is a period where it's great, and then there's a period where it's nothing. So that's when they're at their most vulnerable, and we have to try. Right, we're thinking about running a program where we can get education into the agencies, that, you know, people have the knowledge going forward. Say it's a 2-year plan or a year plan, depending, because you do have to mentally prepare yourself as well as preparing yourself to go out into the working field other than law enforcement. So it's a process. It's a big process.
Yeah, and you know, I've always been surprised. You know, at every department that we work with, we have a liaison in the department. It's typically a lieutenant, a captain, and maybe a chief in a smaller department. But you know, in doing this for years, a lot of these more senior folks that we deal with have retired, and I've always been surprised that, you know, somebody will announce their retirement, and I'll be on the phone with them and say, "What are you going to be doing? You're retiring in 6 weeks," and they haven't really thought about it. Or you know, we'll get a call 5 days after they retire saying, "Hey, you guys hiring? You know, I'm looking for something to do." And it's surprising to me that the planning starts then, right? And if you think about law enforcement retirement, it's quite a bit different than what you might think of as corporate retirement, right? So somebody, say an accountant retires, right? First of all, he's probably about the same age as all of his friends who are retiring. You know, the guy's in his late 60s or early 70s or something like that. He's hanging it up, and he's got a whole network of other non-work friends who are roughly the same age who are also retiring, and they're going through this together, right? That's not the case really in law enforcement, and in a sense, it really shouldn't be called retirement, because retirement almost implies stop working. But when you're retiring, quote unquote, at the age of 48 or 50 or 52, where a lot of law enforcement, quote unquote, retires, it's really that you're leaving one stage of your career or life and entering another stage of your career and life. It's not that you're truly retiring in the sense of the word, right? So that's one big difference on law enforcement retirement versus corporate retirement, if you will. It happens at a different stage of life. It tends to happen much earlier, when you could have 40 years ahead of you, 50 years ahead of you, right? And then the other thing I've noticed about law enforcement retirement that makes it much different, and Amanda, you brought this up, is that there is a brotherhood in the law enforcement world that really doesn't exist in most other endeavors, right? So when an accountant retires, they typically aren't still going to accountant conventions, and they don't talk about themselves as an accountant. They're now done with that stage of life, and they moved on to something else. And if somebody says, "Well, what do you do?" They probably say, "I play golf," as opposed to, "I'm an accountant," right? But in law enforcement, it's different. There is a deep sense of loyalty and brotherhood that I do think has a major effect on the psyche of an officer retiring, of somebody in law enforcement retiring, that, as you point out, Amanda, can lead to a sense of a lack of self-knowledge, or who am I now, self-identity problems that you don't see in most other endeavors, right? And as a result, as you point out, again, that can lead to a dark area. And I do think that's those two differences between law enforcement retirement and, say, corporate retirement, the age that it happens, and therefore the difference between your cohort, your friends and people that are your age and they're not retiring and you are, and also the deepness of the brotherhood, can really lead to some bad outcomes, as you point out.
Absolutely. Exactly, and especially if they've already gotten, because as you know, with the whole PTSD and PTSI and what have you, a lot of it, there's so much stigma surrounding it. It's slowly but surely starting to break down somewhat, but because there's so much stigma about it anyway, they don't really talk about it, and a lot of the time it goes untreated and unspoken about. So they take that, they already have that stress, and they're taking that then on into retirement. And I think that's where, you know, if we can catch people early on to get the peer-to-peer support and the help they need, whether it be against addictions or whether it could be against, you know, where they go in to speak to somebody, a psychiatrist or whatever the case may be. But that's key that they get that help, because I do think that we have to catch it as early on as possible, because when you do go to retire, like I said, it's a process. It's like, and again, it's like you said, the Brotherhood and what have you, it's very, very different. They have to prepare themselves not only mentally, as in that they're no longer a part of that Brotherhood, but and then channeling what they need to do going forward. But I do think when they already have that PTSI or whatever the case may be that they do have, that's hindering them from planning for the future. So I do think that's why I think having a 2-year or a year process of, you know, coming to terms with that you are retiring, and that you do have to, you know, prepare so well for it, because it can affect your being, it can affect everything about you, you know, and again, if you go on into a new job after you do retire, then you take all that baggage with you, you know, and then you're not going to be performing at your best, and that's not good. So we want to make sure that they have the best resources available to them.
And to me, there's a pre and a post. I mean, there does need to be support for post-retirement after it happens. But when you really think about retirement, what's happening? You're moving from one life stage to another life stage, and this happens in life as we grow up, right? So a high school student will eventually, you're out of high school. There's a time when this happens that you don't have a choice. You can't go to another grade, and you either are going to get a job, you're going to go to college, you're going to go into the military, but you're going to do something, right? And if you think about that change, that life stage change, you really start thinking about it 3 years in advance, right? I mean, do I want to go into the military? Do I want to get a job? If so, what do I want to do? I want to get a trade? Do I want to learn how to become a carpenter? Do I want to go to college? If so, what do I study? The colleges will come to your high school and talk to you about, you know, their program. You may go visit college campuses. The high school probably employs one or more people with a job title of guidance counselor. So these are people who are there to guide you in this decision from moving from one life stage to another life stage. It's a 2 or 3 year process that
Exactly.
you go through, right? And then think about when you say you go to college. Again, this will end, right? You know, typically it's 4 years. It may stretch out to 5, depending on what you're doing in your major and so on. But eventually it ends. And once again, you have time. You have a year or 2 or 3 to think, when I get out of here, what am I going to do? And the colleges have something called career placement centers. And there are people there who help you create a resume. They help you, how do you interview? They guide you on that. They guide you on what types of jobs are out there. Companies will come to the college to interview people. There's a whole process that you go through that goes over a 2 or 3 year period that prepares you. So it's not like you're just dumped off into an office at the end of college. You've thought about this for 2 years. You've had a long time, and other people have helped you prepare for this. And you get married. There's a whole business, there's a whole industry that is there ready to advise you and take your money on how to go through a wedding, right? You have a baby, there's 9 months in there, right? It's God has created a 9-month plan that you have to get ready for this. And you go to Lamont class and you go to, you know, you do all these things to prepare. It's not like the baby just shows up and nobody expected this to happen. You had 9 months, you know. With this particular life stage in law enforcement retirement, really doesn't have this infrastructure built around it, right? And even a corporation, say a corporation is going to lay off a number of people, even there, they will often send people to outplacement. And in outplacement, you may have 6 or 12 months where you have an office to go to. You have guidance counselors. You have people to talk to. You have a support structure. You have other people that you're around that you're going through this with. But here again, in law enforcement retirement, there's not this infrastructure in it. And I think that lack of preparation, as you talk about, Amanda, the lack of talking about it, the lack of infrastructure, that, you know, all of a sudden you feel kind of dumped off. You feel like, are you really a part of this brotherhood that you've been a part of for 30 years in the same way that you were? And you're relatively young. You're typically in, you know, early 50s or something like that. There needs to be some level of infrastructure to help before the retirement, and also, as you point out, Amanda, post-retirement, to keep people on track, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. If only agencies could, like, I know they have so much to do on a day-to-day basis anyway. I mean, I'm not too sure I would be able to run an agency, but having said that, I think, you know, we owe it to them. They owe it to them. You know, they are a brotherhood, and if you care about your brother so much, and you would jump in front of a bullet for them, why don't we care about them and their well-being and how they move forward and they progress? Because we do want them to do well. We do want them to be happy in their lives, you know. If there's one thing I hate seeing, it's seeing that somebody has taken their own life who has left the brotherhood, you know. And the funny thing about it is, lately, particularly with the NYPD, there has been a couple of high-ranking officers who have taken their own lives once they retired. So, you know, if they're feeling it, then something has to be done about it. You know, the preparation has to be there for them. We have to educate them. They have, you know, they get people in who is going to run these courses with them, that is going to tell them that this is what's going to happen to your life once you leave. So here's your options. And, you know, here's how you can channel everything that you've learned and put it into good use to find yourself a successful career, or to even become an entrepreneur. Who knows? Because an awful lot of officers who are very successful now are entrepreneurs. And it's funny, a lot of them, most of them who I've spoken with have been through the ringer and back again with PTSD and addictions. So it's actually driven them, once they got clean out, or they got better. Not that they got better, you can never get better from it, but you can manage it. But once they manage it, they then wanted to say, you know what, I want better for me, and here's how I do it. So they focus on what they want, and they set themselves goals, and they focus on what they want, and they get after it. And the good thing about it is, along the way, is all of these people who have become entrepreneurs and who have been through it all are amazing people. They actually take their experiences and then help other officers with their experiences. Because I think, you know, we can have all the doctors in the world, and doctors are fantastic, and we cannot do without them. But for that initial stigma, and even going forward with this whole retirement thing, to talk to an officer who has retired and who is successful, I think that's key. I think what happens is we can bring in all these advisors and everybody else, but unless you're actually working in the industry and you know that brotherhood, I think it's very easy for them not to listen or not to care. But if it's coming from one of their own, I think, then yeah, I think they will, you know, sit up, pay attention, because at the end of the day, they are them. They are brothers, you know. So I do think it would help massively, massively if we could do that. I think it needs to happen, and it needs to happen fairly soon, because it's just getting worse. You know, it's sad. It's very sad.
And I think that for an officer who's about to retire, to have a network of officers who already retired to talk to could very much alleviate one of the problems that you brought up earlier in this conversation, which is this problem of, well, I've been a police officer my whole life, I don't have any other skills. And that's so untrue. I mean, when you think about what do you do if you're a law enforcement, not just police officer, but any form of law enforcement, right? You're negotiating with people all day long. You're being lied to all day long, so you have to decipher that, right? You're strategizing and how to de-escalate tense situations, right? You're thinking through how to get through potentially physical altercations in a way that neither side gets hurt. You're doing a lot of things that are valuable skills in a lot of different industries. So I think a lot of times law enforcement tends to look at their skill at too high a level. Well, my skill is law enforcement, but you really need to look at these micro skills that you're picking up throughout the 30 years that you've been in law enforcement. And these are the same skills that you know, a lot of other people in a lot of other jobs pick up and are considered valuable. Think about an HR director, human resources director, right? Well, they have to interview people. They have to negotiate with people. They have to decipher when they're being lied to, right? They have to do background checks on people. These are the same things that the many officers are doing, but they don't look at it like that. And they need to realize that the skills they have are plentiful and valuable. And I think that talking with officers that came before them who are already retired and seeing what they're doing would be very, very valuable. And you know, another thing that you brought up, you know, if people think, well, this is great, when I retire, I'm going to fish and I'm going to hunt, and there's a lot of hours in a day, right? You're only going to fish and hunt, you know, so much. And you know, a friend of mine is a psychologist, or actually a psychiatrist, and his niche was he helped people who suddenly came into money, which you would think, what, you know, what problems do they have, right? You go from being worth nothing to $20 million, life is great. But he pointed out that now, you know, a lot of times life isn't great when that happens. You now have a whole host of different problems. You have a whole, you're in a world that you were never in before. And you're interacting with people that you've never interacted with before, and you're not so sure how to, and you don't feel comfortable, and so on. And so even though you think it's going to be great, and you think, well, I'm going to hunt and fish, and, you know, I'm going to take vacation, you really need to think through how this is going to affect you on a day-by-day basis and be prepared for it. Because one of the, you know, kind of a blessing and a curse is there's a lot of hours in retirement, especially when you're doing it at the age of 50 and not 73 or something like that. And I think through that and having somebody or a network of people to help you think through it, and hey, what have you guys done, and well, how do you spend your time now, and where are you guys working, and so on, would be very, very valuable.
I agree. And you're spot on. I think they need to break down every aspect of their skills. You know what I mean? Because people pay to have courses in those skills. Right. You know what I mean? Right. You think of it logically, like, I mean, people will go and learn how to negotiate with people, or, you know, and pay a lot of money for it. So, I mean, they already have them in place. It's like you said, it's just about finding your niche, finding what suits you and running with it, you know, and having the confidence to do so. Which is why I think it's so important that we have decent people in there who can help them.
You know, our goal today was just to sort of have an open conversation about what are the issues that we're seeing on this particular subject of retirement, law enforcement retirement, and just sort of come up with something we can get out there. We can get it out on social media. We can invite other people to comment on this, and hopefully, with, you know, you and I working together, our firms working together, we can come up with, you know, what I like to call some at least low-hanging fruit. I mean, some things that we can do relatively quickly to help out. It may not be the end game, it may not be perfect, but at least it's something that's there, and then it leads us to, over the coming years, you know, something that is really helpful for law enforcement to avoid these dark things that we see after retirement.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And even with us doing this, even this interview, if it reaches one chief of police or reaches one sheriff or whatever the case may be, and it resonates with them, they go, yeah, you know, then we've done something positive. This has done something positive, right? Because it's all about raising awareness right now till we get a structure in place. But I genuinely hope that it does reach many, because I think it might, even if we just got them thinking about it, you know, what they can do going forward, because it doesn't just affect the little man on the street, like the cop on the beat or the traffic cop or whatever. This is affecting high-ranking officers, you know, and it affects everybody. And it's like you said before, you could work as an accountant and retire, and you have there's no, you know, fallout from it or whatever. But when you retire from something like this, it's huge, it's massive.
Yep.
And I actually have a dear friend of mine who retired about 2 years ago, and I always remember him saying he was going down to, I think it was a courthouse, to file his papers for retiring, and him saying he just had the most sinking feeling in his stomach. He was like, I feel like I can't do this. I want to do it, but I don't want to do it, you know. Yep. And the funny thing is, he's back now working for law enforcement. He's in the sheriff's department.
We see that a lot. Yeah.
You know, so it's it's a difficult thing for them. It's huge. And again, there is, much as there's stigma around reaching out for help when it comes to PTSD and all that kind of stuff, there's also a stigma surrounding talking to the boys or the girls about, you know,
Right.
I'm nervous about retiring. You know, it's like, again, it's like looking like, shut up, you don't, you know, you're lucky to be retiring. You know, that's the usual sort of answer, but it's not the answer that they want. They actually want support. And I think the support needs to happen from the ground, from their people, you know, when they're about to retire. It's all very well and good getting a retirement present, a pat on the back and a handshake or whatever the case may be, a few drinks or whatever. But I think having that support from your friends to say, listen, buddy, are you really okay? How do you really feel about it?
And that you're still one of us. It's, you know, this notion of your self-identity is gone, and it shouldn't be. You know, you're still part of this brotherhood. You're just in a different stage of life now. You're not a patrolman, you're not a lieutenant, you're not a chief or whatever. That's true, but you're still in the club, right? And knowing that, as opposed to just being off on your own and having a loose network of friends, having some sort of tie back, I think is really important in that world. I don't think it is in a lot of other worlds. You know, going back to our accounting example, I don't think that's really needed there. It's not as much of a brotherhood. Most things are not, but this one is. And so I think that's an important step to recognize and to combat, to avoid what we're seeing, the problems that we're seeing in post-retirement.
That's it. And it's like 30, some officers, I know one going into his 40th year. And I'm like, geez, that's as long as I'm born. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, geez, that's crazy. But when you think about it, it's not just 40 years of working in a job that you love and making all these friends. It's a job where once you suit up that day, you don't know what's going to happen that day.
Right.
You know, you could be killed, your partner could be killed. You know, it's just a split-second decision you might have to make that could destroy you for the rest of your days. And we forget that. And that's why it's so important, for as much as you're a brother in the job, to remain a brother outside of the job.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that, because that's soul destroying if that's ever taken from you. And again, I've spoken to a couple of officers who felt that once their career in law enforcement was over, they'd see their friends every now and then it would just fizzle away. You know, it's very important to keep that bond together, because at the end of the day, he suited up that day to go in and lay down his life for his partner or for his crew, you know. So it's very, very important to follow that through, I think, once their career is finished within law enforcement, because it plays a huge part in them.
And I've heard the same thing, where post-retirement, they get together with their friends, they go to the golf outing and so on, but it fizzles away. And unfortunately, it tends to fizzle away a lot quicker than the stability of retirement sets in. So somebody retires and they're not sure what they're going to do. They haven't thought through this yet. There's been no support structure. And it's good that they're going to the golf outings and seeing their friends and so on. But that tends to fizzle away before they get on their feet. And that's where, you know, danger happens. That's where there's, well, what is my self-identity now? And what am I going to do? And what skills do I have? This needs to be thought through way before this is being thought through now. Yeah.
Way before. That's why I think it should be around about a 2-year plan. Just because, again, it's a mental thing, and it's a mindful thing. They're very different. Like, the mindful is in preparing and focusing on your future and how you can channel your experiences into your future, but then preparing the mind for, I'm not going to be a part of this brotherhood anymore. Well, I will be, but I won't be, if you get me.
Right.
And the loss, because we know family members or we know loved ones or friends for less than 30 years. And if something, God forbid, all harm, if something happened to one of them tomorrow, you'd be devastated, you'd be absolutely heartbroken. So if you're around someone for 35, 40 years or 20 years, whatever, and then all of a sudden that's gone, and then that fizzles away, you're going, well, it's a grieving process. It's like when you lose somebody who's very dear to you. It's an actual grieving process. So they grieve for the loss of their job, for starters, and being a part of their community and having purpose, to then their buddies are gone, who was like their family. And that's extremely difficult.
Right.
Extremely
and so there's multiple senses of loss of, for this brotherhood, which there shouldn't be, because you're not leaving the brotherhood, you're moving to a different stage of it, but unfortunately, because that's not been formalized in any way, there is this sense of loss. And then there's a sense of loss for your buddies, right? You're not going into the office every day and seeing the same people. There's potentially a loss of being in your community, and being looked upon in a certain way. And this all happens at the same time. It's not like one loss happens and 3 years later another one. You're being hit bam, 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 one after another. And that's very difficult, and I agree that this is something that isn't discussed enough, and it needs to be put out in the limelight, which is why we're having this conversation today. So.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, we always talk about this fantastic organizations out there similar to me who's all about mental mindfulness and all that kind of thing with law enforcement and first responders. However, yeah, they know that the retirement thing is there. They know that issue is there, but we have to try and do something about it, because as much as we know it's there, we seem to be focusing solely on the people within service.
Yeah.
But for me, it's a bigger picture, because if we put this plan in place, it's like 2 years for it to happen. So they're already in service. So we're still caring about them in service. We're just following it on through to when they retire, right? So that's what I think we need to do, because again, as I said, somebody who is already suffering with PTSI or whatever they have, and they follow that through to their retirement and suffer that loss of their jobs and of their people and everything else. That's not a good place to be in. That's really not a good place to be in, because you can't focus on your future. You don't see a future. Everything is grim, and that's the sad thing about it. And the funny thing is, these guys are probably life and soul of the party, and everybody always sees them. They're always smiling and happy, and where realistically it's a mask they wear, and it's very hard unless you're so close to somebody and you know their moods, their body language and what have you. It's very, very difficult to see someone who's struggling, because if they couldn't talk about their issues within service, they're going to find it really difficult to talk to those outside of service, right? So it just makes things 10 times worse. But so that's why I feel that we need to try and help people prepare for that when they're leaving, because their life is so important too. Just because you're leaving the force doesn't mean you're not important. You are important. Every officer to me is important, and their well-being.
So yeah, and I think this has been a great conversation and an important conversation. So we got some of the issues out there, and I believe that if those of you watching, there's contact information on the bottom of the screen. We'd love to hear your stories, your thoughts, resources you're aware of. Amanda and I are going to be working on this going forward together, and we're not sure where it's going to lead, but we know it's not the whole retirement thing, if you will. It's not in a good place right now, and so we're going to work together to try and do what we can with other resources to get it in a better place for future officers who are retiring and ones who are recently retired. So Amanda, it was great talking to you again, as always. And I'm looking forward to seeing what good things we can do together on this particular topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it too. Good. Like I said, if we can just change the mindset of one, we've done something good. So it's all good.
I agree.